Calista Enterprise.
Hi everyone, my name is Joakim. I come from a company called Calista Enterprise, and today I have a confession for you. I am a web frameworks addict. I started in the late 90s, and then I started with the easy stuff such as ASP. I went on to PHP, I did some Perl programming, and I was able to control it back then. Then came Java servlets. This was what all of the cool kids were using, and it was a place where I could actually manually concatenate all my HTML strings into one huge string buffer before I outputted it to the user. Those were the days. Since then, I've been using pretty much everything that the nice Java community has thrown at me. And one day, I woke up and found myself thinking, I'm at the bottom of this. I can't really get any lower right now. I'm going to work today, and I'm going to do Java server phases. I didn't really recover from that. That was the absolute bottom, and I needed to take a break. So what I did was that I stopped going to work. Instead, I went home to take care of my newly born child, and life was good again. About a year later, I came back, and all this talk about Java web frameworks has disappeared for some reason. Nobody was interested in Java web frameworks anymore. JavaScript was the new cool kids on the block, and everybody wanted to know it. And I didn't hesitate. I went in full-hearted. So for the last couple of years, I've been doing JavaScript development full-time. I've been working with some of these frameworks as well. And I'm using it to create a really, really awesome application. And hopefully I will be able to show you a little bit about that today. So that's my plan. So let's start with a demo. So this is my awesome demo application that we're going to use today. So as you can see, oh crap. The first demo failed, that's perfect. Let's see. This is a hello world application, and what you can do is that you can type into this field, and it will actually output it for you. So let's see some code for how this is done. I had a little Git breakdown just before I went in here. So this is the code for making this work. So as you can see, I've been using Angular for this awesome application. And what I do is that I just create a new model, and I bind it to a model called your name here. And whenever I change that model, it will be outputted into the page. Now, what is the problem with this kind of application? I mean, besides the fact that it didn't work in my presentation now because there is a Zeta index problem. What is the problem? Well, first of all, I don't know about you, but it was a really, really long time ago when I created an application with only one text field. There actually aren't that many single field web applications out there. This is more like a normal form. I mean, this is a really small form. It's not a huge form. Usually they are much bigger. There are related fields that are tied to each other. There are sub-forms, stuff like that. But it's a little bit bigger. Now, what is the problem with this one? Well, there aren't that many single form web applications either. Actually, the applications look more like this. We have a hierarchy of nested views, and each of these views have a different set of data that need to be managed. And then we have the web. The web has its own unique challenges and opportunities. And you can see here in this example, we just added some Chrome here. And what happens when you press refresh, or when you go back and forward in the browser? Or maybe the user clicks on a link and decides to open it in a new tab. How should we handle that? We should handle it, but how should we handle it? So many applications are also built up of mashups of a lot of different components. So this is not really the end either. Maybe we have some kind of a static field up here where they can put some, maybe a shopping cart, maybe a messaging system, maybe some kind of monitoring panels of some kind. All possible to do. So that should also be handled. It should not be part of the normal routing mechanism. It should always be there. It should not be, the user can click anywhere else and it should still work. So the title of this talk suggests that I'm going to talk to you about the web framework and how to use them in real applications. And what do I mean by real application? Well, two things. First of all, I want to get past the simple case with just a simple hello world, which still doesn't really work, so it's not really interesting. So I want to get past that and get into something that we can actually use for real. And the other thing is that I don't really want to create simple web application where only a small part of the page is dynamic. I want to create real applications that can be used professionally. I mean, for instance, like a healthcare system or order systems, CRM system or something like that. Maybe even a system for controlling factories. And that is actually the demo that I'm going to be using today. So here is the demo. So what is it? It's a little bit white right now, but it's going to be apparent very soon. So this is an all-in-one system for managing a factory, a real factory. So it has everything from creating new customers, to taking orders from these customers, to managing all of the recipes to create the actual concrete, to actually hitting produce and seeing the concrete flow through the factory. So it's a quite complex application. And this is the application that I've been working with for like the last 2 years. What we were set out to do was to replace a Windows system that's been in use for like 15 years. And we wanted to have all the functionality, but we wanted to have it on the web. So it's quite a task there. So how many of you in here are active in the concrete industry? So not that many. Okay, so you're not customers then. I sort of figured that. So I changed the domain a little bit to make it a little bit more understandable. So instead, we're not going to mix concrete, we're going to mix drinks. You know about drinks, don't you? Yeah. So let's see here. Let's take a look at this demo here. So first of all, we have a list of customers, so we can register as a customer here. Let's do that. Let's create a customer. Let's create a It's very, very important with age in Sweden when it comes to alcohol, so I need to enter my birth date there. So let's create, I'm just going to Gothenburg. I can't see what I'm typing there, so probably I mistyped it, but it doesn't really matter. So I create the customer. Then we have a set of different ingredients that we can use to create our drinks and the pricing for them. Then we have a set of recipes on how to create different drinks. So for instance, if we want to do a dried martini, it's a little bit of gin, Vermont, and a little bit of ice as well. So let's see what we can do here. Let's create an order. So we create an order, we choose a customer. So I want to order something. I want to order one, and it's really hard to see. Let's take that one, whatever that is. And we can actually, it's a little bit nervous standing up here, so I think that I need to increase that one a little bit. So it's going to be okay. So now what we can do is that we can actually start this one. And what you will see is that it will start. So this is running using WebSocket. So if you were connected to this, you will see it immediately on all the other connected devices as well. And as you can see, it starts weighing up the different materials on the different scales. So you have, and then it's filling it into some kind of a blender that blends it together, and then it serves the actual drink for me. Now this is not really that different from the actual concrete factory that we are building. We actually have a test rig just like this for testing purposes in our office. Fun afterworks there. So anyway, so this is the demo that I'm going to be using a little bit to just demonstrate for you today. But let's meet our first framework in this little battle. So my starting point for this presentation is Backbone.js. And this is the framework that I've spent the most time with, of course, since I've been doing it for like 2 years. And the reason for why I wanted to give this talk in the first place was that I was working with Backbone. I customized the hell out of it, so now it worked really, really good. Worked exactly like I wanted it to do. But then I saw all the demos from all the conferences about Ember and Angular, and they looked so nice. And what am I doing here? Why am I working with Backbone? So I wanted to see if it was really true. So I built up this system in all the different frameworks and saw if it was true. And we'll see before we get home. So Backbone is probably the MVC type framework that's been in wide use the longest. It's not the oldest, but it's been in wide use the longest, I think. It has its quirks, but it's definitely a really good framework. So Backbone is a really unopinionated framework. And by that I mean that you get a foundation, but besides that you're pretty much on your own. You can do pretty much any way, build it any way you want. And coming from Java and a jQuery world, this was quite nice. I didn't want the lock-in effects from like JSF or something like that. I wanted to build my applications just like I wanted to. So that's why I chose the Backbone in the first place. I added these quick facts. I'm not going to talk much about it. I'm just going to say that the size there is the framework itself plus its dependencies, so you know. So Backbone is sort of a model view controller framework. But instead of a controller, it actually uses a router. So it uses the URL nature of the web to instead of a controller. It doesn't really tell you how you should create your views. You can do it any way you want. But the most common thing is that you use some kind of templating engine, such as underscore or handlebar, something like that. So the router is great. The views are not that great. But the model is actually what I was most tempted to use in Backbone in the first place. And that's quite ironic, because now when I started to think that maybe Backbone is not the best solution for me, it's actually the models that disgusts me the most. So it's a good place to start today. So let's return to the demo again to see how it works. So we had our customers here, as I said earlier, and it's a real simple data model here. We have an ID number, we have a name, street, zip code, city. No external dependencies, just a single customer. Really simple to use. Next thing is an order. An order is much more complicated. As you saw here, we had a reference to a customer. Quantity is simple, but then we have a recipe, and whenever we choose a recipe here, you can see that we see the ingredients here, and we can change the amount. So what we actually do is that we copy all of the ingredients over to the order and able to change it. So let's see how the data model for this application looks. So it's not a big data model, it's a small system. I shrinked it down quite a lot for the demo. But there are a lot of things here that we are not really interested in. So let's slim it down a little bit more. So let's take a look at customer first. Customer has a set of properties, but no external dependencies. Then we have order, and order is dependent on customer, and it also has a list of materials. But we also want to manage this amount, a special amount there, so we have some kind of a mapping table between them. Not really that. It's the same as we're always done in JPA or something like that. So how does Backbone map this model? Well, mapping in Backbone is quite straightforward, at least when you have these real simple models. So we extend the model, we can set defaults if you want to, then we create a collection of models, and we set an endpoint where we can get the information from the server. Quite straightforward. If we want to get the information about it, we create a new collection, and then we call fetch. And whenever we have fetch, when we have a success, then we can do whatever we want with the data. Saving, the same thing. Get a reference to the object, do the changes, call save, and react to the success handler. Now, customer is the simplest entity here, but what if we go to a much more complicated stuff like the order? So let's first look at the data here. You can see here that this is the JSON data for an order. And it has a nested collection down there with material amounts that we need to handle in some way. So how can we do this? As it turns out, we can't. At least not out of the box in Backbone. There is no way of handling relational data in Backbone. There are a lot of plugins that fixes this for me, but in this particular case, it's not that difficult, so I'm going to do it myself. And that's what I've done in my project as well. So what we do is that we create material amount, a model for it, and a collection for it, just like we did before. And then we create an order. And then we define how the relations should work. So we say here that whenever you see a property called material amounts, that is supposed to be a material amount collection. Next step is that we need to parse so whenever we get data from the server, the parse method is called, and then we use this relation metadata that we created just to make sure that we do that. Code is not really important. So maybe you're wondering a little bit why you want to map all your data to Backbone. I mean, it's data. It's just data. Why do we need this Backbone model stuff on top of it? As it turns out, Backbone really needs it. Otherwise, it's really hard to be notified when something changes and stuff like that. So, and we want to know when our data changes, as we will see. So now that we have the data, we can iterate over it. Here is an underscore template. Not really much to see there, except that there is a lot of JavaScript inline in the HTML, which is probably not that nice, but it works. Now let's see how this is done in Angular. And Angular doesn't really have a concept of models. At least not in the sense that it has a model class or something like that. Instead, it says that any JavaScript data can be our model. So, how do we encapsulate this in a way that it's usable to us? Well, then Angular uses a thing called directives. So what we have here is that we created the service. We created a service here called order, and this order encapsulates this functionality where it returns a resource for a specific URL and some mapping. So it's pretty much the same, but the syntax is kind of ugly. So now when we have this service, we can inject it into our application and into our controller, and then we can call query on it to get a list of all orders, and then we can call save to save it to the server. Kind of the same thing. So how about embedded data then? I haven't really talked about that, and I haven't talked about customer. I started with the order right away. And the reason for that is that works out of the box. JavaScript has support for nested properties, so obviously Angular has support for it. So that works quite nice. So now when if we modify this a little bit, say that we update the customer there, for instance, and put in a little bit of a name and stuff like that, so we have more information available, we can do some cool things. We could have done this in Backbone as well, but since it's so complicated to map data in Backbone, we don't really do that. But here it comes out of the box, so it's really easy to do. So now what can we do with this? Well, now we can create a view for this. And as you can see here, we are just looping over the orders, and we can traverse the model there, order.customer.name. Really simple. And whenever the name changes, it will change there as well. Now, there are some, so this is much nicer than the underscore template before. But there are some considerations to take here, and that is not specific to Angular. It's also a problem maybe with Ember and the knockout that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And that is performance. I'm not going to go into much detail about that because there is a really, really great talk available on YouTube from Marius Gundersen at the JSConf EU in Berlin this autumn, where it talks about performance considerations with this. So you should definitely check that out. So let's move on to Ember then. So Ember has a module called Ember Data. And this model is kind of the same thing as the resource thing I used with Angular earlier. It's an external dependencies, but it's maintained by the same folks that makes the project. And this kind of syntax should look quite familiar to you if you are using JPA or Hibernate or something like that. We actually are describing our data, and we are saying that this attribute should be of this type, stuff like that. We have number, we have string, we have dates, we have booleans, and we can also create our own parsers for this. Now the next two lines are really interesting, customer and recipe. What we're doing there is that we are actually telling Ember that this should be related to those entities instead. So we're saying that the customer is a customer model. And with the material amounts, we say that it has many material amounts. So we're just describing it there. It's just like one-to-many, many-to-many, and stuff like that in Hibernate. So, and then we can create our material amount like this, and we can go further down the graph. So here we have a mapping down to material. So if we want to save, if we want to get this data, we call find on an order, and Ember uses promises wherever it can. So we just create the promise, and then we observe whenever the promise resolves, then we get the data. And it works the same way if you want to save it. Now, why is it so nice that a framework knows exactly how the different entities in the system are connected to each other? Well, let's say that you have the same JSON structure that we had before, not the extended one with the customer name and everything like that, just a plain old thing with only the customer and only the ordered data. Now, Ember knows about how these are connected to each other, so now we can handle it for us. So let's see how the view can look for this now. As you can see here, we have the same kind of the same thing, a little bit of different syntax. We're looping over the orders, and we are still using order.customer.name, even though we don't have that in our JSON response. And the reason why that works is that Ember knows that a customer is a customer, and it knows where to find the customer, so it can get a request there. We have the n+1 problem that we need to handle, but it's so much nicer. And we can even go nested, so you can see for the material that we have looked up the name as well. So one thing that I haven't really mentioned here is that Ember and Angular are using data binding between the views and the model. And that's quite different from the underscore templates that we did with Backbone earlier. So, because whenever something changes in the model data, in the Ember and Angular case, the view is updated. But in the Backbone case, we have to do that ourselves. So this is not good for a factory. We can't really do refresh all the time. That's not good. So we chose to use another plugin for that, and we ended up, after some problems, we ended up using Knockout. Knockout can be used together with Backbone, but it's probably not the thing it was intended to do. It's probably meant to be done separately and be complete its own framework. But I think it's a little bit too small for that. But combined to Backbone, this works quite nice. So Knockout does one thing really good, and that is data binding. I think it does data binding much better than both Angular and Ember does it. And that is what I'm using it for in my solution. So Knockout is a model view model framework, which is a little bit strange. But the view model is supposed to be a place where you can put stuff that is not necessarily part of the model. It may be something that you need for presentation. So for instance, in my forms there, I had a list of all the customers, for instance. And that list of customers could go in the view model. And we can use the view model to put in computer properties to look up the things like name and stuff like that. So it's really powerful. That can be done in Ember as well, putting more things on the scope, and in Angular, in Angular use the scope, and then in Ember you can do it on the controller. So there are ways to do it there as well. So this is how Knockout would have created the list of customers. So you see it looks quite similar. We do a data bind instead of ng each, but I repeat, it looks kind of the same. There's one huge problem with Knockout in this scenario, though, and that is that it doesn't read Backbone models. And I have Backbone models, so how do I get from one to the other? That's quite difficult. And then we use some kind of a glue. This glue is called Knockback. Quite a clever name, right? As you can see, what we're doing here is that when we have our model in Backbone land, then we can create a view model from that model and create a view model in Knockout land. And then we apply this model to the view, and it works. So it's not that bad for this simple example, but I promise you that my real application is not that simple. So it's a slippery slope that we are trying to engage in there. And what we end up in after a while is basically technical depth. So I didn't tell you really much about myself in that introduction there. I work as a consultant, so this is a huge issue for me. Whenever I am at a customer, I need to deliver something that I can maintain when I leave, hopefully. So this was really bad for me. I created a system that was so much better than anything that I've seen before. And the interactions there were so nice with all the WebSocket communication and everything. But this was my problem. I created a lot of custom solutions, especially for this relational data thing that we talked about a little bit earlier. It worked, but the code should not really be there. It should not be that code. I should not have to write that code. We should not have to maintain that code. Another thing that adds up is dependencies. Because Backbone is quite limited in what it does, so we need to have a lot of plugins to enable to make something useful. The reason why we chose Knockout is a good example of this, because we wasn't using Knockout to begin with. We used a framework called Backbone Model Bind, which was meant to be model binding for Backbone. But when I went there and said, oh, maybe there is an update, and I went, project abandoned. Oh, that's not good. So then I was like 8 months into the project, and I didn't really want to go wrong there, so I put Knockout in. Okay. So what this ends up doing is that we are creating some kind of a code base that is really, really hard to maintain, if not impossible. This is not specific to Backbone. It's worse there, but I think that we are running a risk even in other frameworks. We need to think about what are is the framework providing me, and what do I need besides that. So this section on data was quite huge. But I think it's a really important one. But now it's time to sum it up a little. So I created a list of features that I think is important with regards to data and how the framework should handle it. So first of all, we need some kind of easy access to server data. And now comes the battling part. I graded them. And in my opinion, I think that Ember is the best for this. So it was really easy to do it. I really struggled with it though, because Ember is really nice in the case where your server is set up the way Ember expects it to be. But whenever you go outside that frame, you are into for a little bit of a problem. But still, I think it's so much better. Angular is on the last place here, not because it can't handle it, but because it's not really obvious how to handle it. There are different ways of doing it, and I don't think that is a good way if you want to create maintainable code. And I didn't really like the syntax either. It's really opinionated, this, so you are free to agree with me or disagree with me. Next thing is to handle relational data. I don't want to care about that myself. And obviously, Ember is the winner here as well. Angular is better than Backbone because it handled it transparently anyway, but we didn't have any notation of the framework really knowing how they are connected. Finally, data binding. And here, Angular is king. I have to say, I think it's so nice the syntax they are doing for outputting outputting data into the view. There are some performance issues here, but I think that will be a non-issue in a couple of years at least when the browsers are starting to implement this natively into the browsers now. I mean, Google can control the browser, so it's a good thing. I also hope that Ember will be better at this. They are trying to replace handlebars now with something called HTML bars, which will make it much better as well. So I haven't really presented Ember and Angular yet, so let's do that before we continue with the next topic here. So Angular is probably the framework that everybody thinks is winning right now, right? How many thinks it's winning? Yeah? pretty much half of you. That was a little bit lower than I expected, actually. How many think that Ember is winning? A couple of, yeah, great. Anyway, there's a huge momentum behind Angular. And whenever I talk to someone who are about to rethink their front-end code, they all say we are going to go with Angular. Why? They haven't really thought about that. So momentum is huge in this market. I mean, if we have corporations such as Google behind us, it's really seen as a guarantee that this will go on forever. And it's a good framework, so don't get me wrong there. Angular is kind of opinionated. It's much more opinionated than Backbone in a way. But you can still go outside the box quite easily if you want to. So you're not really fixed there. Angular puts a lot of focus into the controller and into the view. So the view was really great here, and the controllers are also really great in Angular. Models, not that much. But what they also have is this concept of services and directives, where services are basically a way to encapsulate business logic, and the directives is a way to encapsulate presentation logic. It's some kind of definition. Angular also uses dependency injection quite aggressively, and this is really nice, especially when you're considering testing abilities. Ember, on the other hand, is extremely opinionated. I don't know if you know about the creators here, but Yehuda Katz is one of the core team member of jQuery, Ruby on Rails, and Ember, of course. And he has a very, very precise opinion about how web applications should be created, and that shines through very much in the Ember framework. So sometimes this is the best things about Ember, and sometimes it's the worst. It's kind of like Apple products. When it works very good, but if it doesn't, it's terrible because you can't really do anything about it. So Ember is the model view controller framework, very much like the others. But one thing that is different here is they don't really have to create all of these components yourself. Say that you're not going to do anything special in your controller, then you don't need to create it. Ember will create it for you. So it's definitely a convention over configuration framework. And as you will see in the next section here, I'm going to talk about is that Ember puts a huge emphasis on routing. They think that routing is the core foundation of how you should create web applications. So the routing is very big here. And they also have something similar to directives, sort of, in Angular, and they're called components. So if you want to create GUI components, you can do that inside Ember as well. So let's talk about routing. So what is routing, first of all? Well, as you can see in my application here, we have an address field up here. And whenever I click something in my application, you will see that this URL changes. And this is very important because now I can actually go back and forward in my browser, and it works perfectly. I can bookmark this in my browser if I want to, and it will work perfectly. Now we only have this routing 2 levels deep, one master and one detail, but it's definitely possible to go further down and have many levels deep in some ways. Now what happens if I go to customer here and I go to one specific customer and I press refresh? Well, first of all, you need to get the information about the customer, of course, because you're going to create a customer form. But you also need to create a list of customers, right? So there are two different things you have to do there. And if you have more nested routes, you need to set up each of them individually. So let's see how this is done in Backbone first. So in Backbone, we start with some kind of a routing table, where we specify all the routes that are available in the system. There's a flat structure. We are saying customers, it's just a list. Then whenever the user clicks or types a URL or something like that, it will hit one of these actions that are mapped in the routing table. And then we are going to create a new view. We are going to fetch the data that should be present for that route and populate the view with that. And then we render it. The same goes for edit customer. So here we get one specific customer, and then we create a view and insert it into there. So this works very great if we have gone from the list and clicked on one of the items in the list. But what happens if we press refresh there or go directly to that URL? Well, then we need to set up the list of customers as well. So we can do that manually. Now this is okay in that kind of really small situation like this, but once you get into more advanced routing and a lot of nested routes, this gets really cumbersome to handle. So Ember does it differently. It starts kind of the same way with the routing table, but what you can notice here is that it's actually nested. So we can nest that further down. We can nest it as far as we want to, and that's the first step in making this work. Now, once it got this routing map, then Ember does its magic and creates all of these routes and controllers and everything for us based on the names that we are giving it here. And we need to know how this naming mechanism works, because we can't change it. So for instance, if we want to go to the customer edit page, then we are going to hit the customer's edit route. That's just the way it is. Now we can customize this route if you want to. So in this case, I'm actually looking up a particular customer and putting it into my route. And then it's the same for customer as well. So here I'm looking up all customers. Notice here that I don't have any kind of dependencies between these specified in the code here. Or I kind of do actually. I did have some kind of dependency here, because here I already say it in the definition that the edit route is dependent on the customer's route, right? So now whenever we go to edit route, it knows that, okay, I'm dependent on customer's route, so then I need to render that one as well. That's quite nice. How about Angular then? Well, Angular doesn't really consider routes to be as core of a component as Ember does. It's really hard to get those names right. Hopefully I haven't screwed it up too much. It's been moved out to a separate module. So it's easy to pull in, but still. It kind of looks the same way as the Backbone router here. We have a flat structure of URLs, and then we have a syntax for specifying which template should be active and which controller should be active. So it's a nice syntax, but it's so flat. Now, Angular has there is a project for Angular called Angular UI Router, and this is if you want to get into using nested routes, you should really check this one out. In some regards, it's even better than the Ember one, so it's really good. It's from the same team that have created the Bootstrap components for Angular as well. So time for the list again. Now we've gone a little bit through routing. So I think that the framework should definitely provide some kind of advanced routing mechanism for us, because it's really good to have a way to map our URLs to a defined state. And Ember does this by far the best. The framework for routing is actually open source, so it can be incorporated into Angular apps if you want to. I don't know if anybody has ever done that, but it's possible. Angular is good as well, but still it's one level. One thing that many people seem to forget about when we are talking about web applications is animations. I mean, if you're creating an iPhone application, you can't really avoid putting a lot of animation for everything. New row, animate. Delete row, animate. Move row, animate. Transition to another screen, animate. And the web is another thing. And I haven't shown you any code for this, but Angular has excellent support for this. It has some hooks so you can hook into and just provide some CSS to make the animations work. As you saw earlier, when I clicked on the edit for customer, for instance, it animated that view, and it should do that pretty much everywhere. So this talk is running out of time, as I know it would, so I'm not really surprised by that. But I chose to focus on these two because I think that these two are the most important one. And the most important one I defined by this was the big pain points for me when I was using Backbone. I had so much problems with these two problems, with these two topics. And now it's solved so nicely. But we are going to pick a winner here occasionally. We need some kind of more data. So I thought I'd go a little bit through some other aspects of it without showing any code. So first of all, we also want our frameworks to provide some kind of validation mechanism, right? What you will be surprised with, I think, I was at least, is that the only framework of these three that provides a built-in system for validation is Angular. The other ones don't have anything built in. You need to have some kind of a plugin. That's so strange. You also need to be able to perform more complex validations. And by complex, I mean validate the fields that are related to each other, or fill up the constraints and stuff like that. Yeah, Angular is the only one that has any support, really. You can do it in the other as well, but it's not really a good fit. Backbone is particularly difficult here, because Backbone, there you always specify the validations on the model, and the model doesn't have access to anything else, so it's really, really hard to do some kind of relational stuff there. Static areas, it was the area where I had all the silos and everything in my example here. I included that because that was a really big problem in Backbone. Not to put it there, but to actually get some data from it. In Ember and Angular, that is really, really good. I mean, that's the way Angular works out of the box, so it's really simple. So in Angular, it's much easier to create static fields than to create routing fields. So. And finally, I want the framework to be able to react to WebSocket updates. WebSocket is the thing that I talk about most frequently when I'm talking at conferences. I think it's awesome. I think everybody should be using WebSockets all the time because it's so good. And then the JavaScript frameworks need to be able to handle that in a good way. And they all are. It's no problem whatsoever to incorporate that into them. They haven't gotten anything built into them, but it's not hard to jack it in. Backbone is the best one because we have a global model, and it's really, really clear when it's going to be there. Ember has some problems when it comes to knowing which WebSocket is so fast, so basically the response is coming back faster than we get the response back from our IX request. So there are some problems there. But it works quite good. So this ends our list for now. I could have talked about internationalization, localization, how templates work in more depth. Security is another thing. Performance, and also softer values such as the community, the user base, and the values of the core team. I think that's quite important when you're choosing a framework as well, and so on and so on. But I'm not going to do that now. So instead, we're going to pick a winner. Now, who's the winner? Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Who's the winner? Well. You should probably think that I would choose Ember in this case because I've been talking a lot about it here, but I'm actually not. I'm choosing Angular. And why do I do that? Well, basically I do that because I think that this is the mature product right now. Documentation is great, the testing support is great, there's a ton of resources available, and to be honest, this is the only framework that actually feels ready. For now. Because I think that this can change quite a lot. And if you listen to this presentation and haven't been sleeping the whole time, it wouldn't come as a surprise for you that I think that Ember is doing some things really, really good. I mean, the way it handles data, the way it handles routes is just magical when it works. However, it doesn't always work. Say, for instance, that you cannot control the format that you get from the server, then you need to do some pre-parsing yourself, and all of a sudden it doesn't feel that magical anymore. And that's a bad thing. The other bad thing is that whenever you Google for something, and a problem that you have in Ember, you will get the result. But it will probably be wrong. And the reason for that is that Yehuda and Tom are really, really opinionated. So whenever they feel like, no, this is not a good thing to have, we throw it away. They have just recently reached 1.0, so or recently, a couple of months back, but still. And before that, they didn't care about backwards compatibility at all, and that's really bad right now. So I haven't mentioned Backbone, and Backbone to me is not really in the game anymore, to be honest. I think it's also a reference point for this presentation, just to get the contrast for how the web scene has changed so much in the last 2 years. We have come a long way. Unfortunately, Backbone has not, so it's left. Leave it. That's all I have for today. If you want to get in touch with me, you can catch me on Twitter. I will post the code for this on GitHub eventually, but not today, not tomorrow, another day, when it's a little bit less scattered all across the places. So if you want to know about that, you can follow me on either Twitter or GitHub. That's okay. So thank you all for coming.